Hello and welcome back to How It's Done TV. Today we are doing episode 2 of Cults, The Breakdown. I have Mark with me, who's going to be validating for the Restored Church of God. And I have Dennis, who is going to be validating for the Worldwide Church of God. Thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you.
Good morning.
I don't plan on validating them, Dawn, so I think that's misrepresenting my presence.
We are going to be going over 20 questions to evaluate the validity of a group or leader. So some of these questions may pertain to the churches, some may not, but this is a list, like we did the last list, to determine if a group or church is a cult or not. This one is specific to the leaders. So question 1, and we'll have Mark go and then Dennis go. Ask about credentials. Can they be checked with outside sources? Are they credentials only within the group?
Well, it's depending on what you define as credentials. If you're talking about a church organization, the only credentials, I guess you could say, are, the New Testament, Old Testament, Bible, validating you in that you have God's authority to preach what you're preaching. That's how I interpret credentials. I know that David 𝘉𝙗 of the Restored Church of God was a graduate of Ambassador College, the same as our distinguished guest, Mr. Deal, was. And if you want to talk about credential, I guess that gives them credibility more than credentials. But as far as, most people, when they go to a church, they don't check up on the leader and go, well, what kind of, does he have a PhD? What's his education? Because in reality, religion, business, you look at them very differently. I did not look into credentials at all, but I did believe that he had God's authority at one point. So I saw the Restored Church of God as the one true church where God was working, and that David 𝘉𝙗 was the one that God was using to lead his people in our current age. I later came to see that that was not entirely accurate, to put it mildly. But no, I didn't check for credentials, but I did read his biography and knew, because he would not stop talking about his time at Ambassador College under Worldwide Church of God and Herbert W. Armstrong.
Well, let me make one thing extremely clear. Herbert Armstrong had no credentials except the ones in his mind. Ambassador College is called by others as embarrassing college. It is not, it never was an institution that gave legitimate credentials to anybody. The ministry got credentialed from within the ministry. The Herbert Armstrong, that it was just his own thinking, and that was the credential. I wish I had never gone to Ambassador College, because they had presented it. I had their prospectus. It listed all the faculty members, doctor this, doctor that, so-and-so, the studies. Looked like anything else that I would have gotten from another seminary that I'd also been accepted to, because I wanted to be a pastor. When I got there, I found out these credentials were all given to each other by each other. They were not from outside institutions. And I look back on Ambassador College and my teachers, they knew nothing about the Bible. They were what I call mere Bible readers. And anybody can do that. I grew up with that. But I also grew up with a ministry that went to very professional colleges: Westminster Theological Seminary, Yale University, Princeton University. And some would say, well, that's why they don't know the truth. Well, that's just not right. So in my world, I'm sorry I went to Ambassador College. I would never claim that I had credentials to be a pastor. I didn't. I had to give myself an education after I left the church. And that was that education that took me out of the church. I didn't leave because of the changes. I didn't need the changes. I grew up with the changes. But I would never claim, well, I was an educated pastor. I really knew Bible history. I knew, where things came from. You mentioned Ambassador College to most people, I mean, like 99%, and certainly any biblical scholar, and they'll say, what? What's that? You know, and they'll start using words that you use in an actual institution, and the people that went to ambassador college go, what's that? You know, what does that mean? It's, to me, it was embarrassing. And when somebody said embarrassing college, I remember one time we were climbing Mount Baldy in South Carolina, in California, got to the top, and somebody said to me, oh, where are you guys from? And I said, well, we go to Ambassador College. And he said, bastard what? And I thought, yeah, that kind of fits. You know. And so, you know, some things you can't get out of your mind. Anyway, to the question, the ministry of the Worldwide Church of God had no credentials other than those given within the church. And usually the ones that went outside the church to get credentials didn't stay in the church. You know, I have a good friend who was an evangelist in the Worldwide Church of God, who was totally responsible for the changes. Sorry he ever did it. Who went on to get a legitimate doctorate in theology from an outside institution. And he said it was that education that caused him to realize just how wrong he was about Worldwide Church of God, and even the things that he caused to happen. And he, to this day, he's an agnostic because of his theological education. But there was no theological education. I would sit in a class, was called Harmony of the Gospels. Well, first of all, there is no harmony in the Gospels. But secondly, the man that taught it just came in and gave a sermon. He just gave a sermon. He'd open the Bible, pick out the place in the gospel, and give a sermon. That's not an education. And in fact, one time I asked a question, you know, because I tend to do that. I asked a question, 18 years old. I thought it was a legitimate question about the Gospels. And he made fun of me for asking the question. And he didn't answer the question because he didn't know the answer.
So let me ask you this, Mark, with what Dennis said.
Mm-hmm.
Your face.
My face, blame my parents.
Two-part question. The first one,
yeah,
with what he said to credentials.
Yes.
If he's saying that Ambassador College is really just made up credentials, and David C. Pack went there, does that make his credentials kind of like hogwash too?
Well,
second question is,
quick
what
answer.
if you consider credentials as the titles that they give themselves as the Elijah, the prophet? They're saying that they have these. What are their credentials for? And they're saying the Bible.
Yeah, that's all made up too, on both counts. That's, you know, unless God comes down and tells them, you are this and you are that, which is the Bible pattern. People didn't have to guess in the Bible whether or not God was working with them. They knew when they were a prophet or not. They would hear the audible word of God. Paul on the road to Damascus, Jesus Christ, you know, told him what his role was, and then go here and this will happen. And that is the Bible pattern. The problem with religious, let's just stick with RCG and Worldwide Church of God, those kind of things don't happen. And the leader says, you know, because we're talking about leaders, the leader says, therefore it is. And just like when Dave Pack will look at the Bible pattern of God's government, which is there, and then make his own decisions about who is an evangelist and who is this and who is that, and that, oh, maybe I'm a prophet. It's all imagination. There is no credentials. So in most religions, people are ministers because they seek a role and they fill it, not because anyone anywhere in the world hears God's voice telling them what to do. So in some ways, it's kind of by us decredentialing David C. Pack, you decredential every religious leader in the world today, because none of them have truly heard God's word. Now people are driven to do things, and they want to help people, and they want to guide people, and they have an interest, and they want to serve God's way, and they want to live a moral life. And that's all well and good. It's when you take the Bible or your own quote credentials that you give yourself and use it to exert power over others in a negative way. That is the danger, and that's what we're really talking about. We're not talking about, hey, your local Baptist minister, is a recovering heroin addict and had a religious experience with himself and is now dedicating his life to helping people. That's not bad at all. He's helping people. It's when people tell you, I speak on God's authority, and make promises and claims that God doesn't back up, they're proven to be false. And therefore, the basic question is, are they really a leader, and do they have God's authority? A credential from a college to me means nothing when it comes to religion. It's, are they speaking the truth of the Bible? Are they helping people? And do they have God's authority at all? And with the answer of Herbert W. Armstrong, I've come to realize also, because David C. Pack's root problem is Herbert W. Armstrong. And the Worldwide Church of God Ambassador College trickled down and became Ambassador Center at the Restored Church of God, which is another uncredentialed, unaccredited, private institution, quote unquote, that once you graduate, the piece of paper is worthless. And I knew that when I was there. I knew that when I was taking the classes. In fact, if you're a headquarters staff employee, it is mandatory that you spend your, was $300 or $400 per semester, and you were forced to go. It was expected of you to go. It was not an optional thing, that you had to go through this educational program, which is completely out of date, given by men who are long gone. And David Pack's own epistles series is something that nobody should be listening to because it was his thinking from 5 or 8 years ago. It's all worthless. And so those credentials are all completely made up on all counts.
Well, and I'd like to bump it up just for a moment, that when I say credentials, I don't mean even looking, just reading the Bible. The men I worked for had no understanding of the history of the Bible, the politics, the origins, the typical things that the vast majority of critical scholars in theology would even understand or teach. I hear Dave say things in his sermons all the time about the Bible this and the Bible that, and it's simply not true. He doesn't understand what he's quoting, and of course, as we know, he jumps all over the Bible, seeing things that aren't there and making claims for what he's reading that are not, as I use the term, making the Bible mean what it never meant or ever could mean. Dave is a master at that. And actually, most of the ministers that I knew and know continue with that pattern. They don't know enough about the Bible as a book, a historical book, to even get it right. And Dave's main qualification to me is delusional. You have to be delusional, and now you're qualified to be an apostle of the Restored Church of God. As long as you're delusional, you got all the credentials you need.
Okay, before I move on to question 2, Dennis, you can answer this real quick. For those that are just catching up or just joining us, Ambassador College, it was started by Herbert Armstrong. And what type of college really is it, or was it, put it that way?
Well, I mean, I go on the alumni site of all my former friends and students. They don't talk about how much they learned. Maybe they do in one sense, but a lot of them say, boy, it was a lot of fun. We made some great friends. They were great times and so on. My experience, I went there to study, to be a pastor. And the first week I was there, 𝑘 Armstrong told the whole student body, if you came here to be a minister, you better get that right out of your head. And I thought, what? And so in my quiet mind, I said, well, we'll see. And because that's what I wanted to do. But that was the tradition. You could do that in the Presbyterian Church. You could go to the school and say, I want to be a church pastor, and they would educate you. You went to Ambassador College and said, I wanted to be a pastor, they might ask you to leave, because God will choose, we will choose who gets to be the pastor. And, I guess I won the lottery.
But Ambassador College was started by Herbert Armstrong and his beliefs, not the outside world. It's specifically for Worldwide Church of God.
Right. It was for that because that's what they wanted to teach. They didn't want, it took many, many years before the college would even, or Herbert or anybody, where a minister could go to a seminary and get an education in a specific class, or I know when one of my friends got a professional PhD, legitimate education in counseling, that was controversial because in those classes, you get taught things that probably run against church teaching about how to handle things. I mean, no legitimate counselor is going to say, okay, well, until you straighten up, we're going to disfellowship you. I mean, that would be like crazy. You know, that's not helping anybody. So that was controversial to go outside the institution and get an education. Yeah,
Okay,
to me, it wasn't a college. It was a support system for the salesman.
exactly. Okay, question 2. If there are written materials, are you able to verify authorship and publication? Is it a peer-reviewed publication? Is it a published by a group? Is the article timely, accurate, scholarly, or referenced?
That's a loaded question, Don Blue.
Well,
Listen,
when I look at this,
Mark,
I say the material, obviously, that Herbert Armstrong did, and that David Pack took and kind of to himself.
I think Dennis should go first because chronologically, in order to get to Dave Pack's
You're right.
publications, you have to talk to Dennis first.
And this is very short. The answer to that question, the way you put it, is no. That's the answer.
Add some flavor. Come on, pretend this is Spokesman's Club. You want to add color to your speech, Dennis?
No,
Come on.
It's all written in-house. It's all written by the people that either Herbert Armstrong wrote it, he wrote it. Sometimes he didn't have time to write it, so he had other people write it. The people that wrote for the church wrote what the church taught and what was expected. There was no peer review, unless it was Herbert Armstrong saying, hey, I don't like that article. You know, I don't like the way you put that. I remember one time he recalled an entire edition of the Plain Truth, and we're talking 1 million issues, because he didn't like the cover picture. It didn't represent the world leader properly. So he recalled the whole thing, had it done all over again at oops, an incredible cost. So yeah, say that again, Don.
Basically, the material that Armstrong came up with, you know,
it was all
validated by anybody on the outside.
No, absolutely not. Zero. That's why no is the answer.
And Mark.
So this is a Government of God book published by the Restored Church of God, which Worldwide Church of God did all their internal publishing and printing. Actually, they used there's an external company that did the physical printing, but all the books were produced in-house. David C. Pack's name is on this book, except there's a paragraph worth of people who actually contributed to the books. And their names used to be on the covers until they started leaving. And then they realized, well, you know what? David C. Pack is the figurehead of the Restored Church of God. Let's just put his name on it, not to confuse people. And in a marketing way, I understand that. But everything that David C. Pack has written that are in the literature is based on something that Herbert W. Armstrong had done. So if Herbert Armstrong had written this stuff in-house, David Pack basically rewrote it. And so it's kind of an amalgam of everything else that Herbert Armstrong had written. So it's all internal. There's no peer review. The peer review would be like wordsmithing, checking grammar, punctuation, and spelling, technical. But that's like the only review. Now, I will say that when I was reading the RCG literature back in 2011 and 12, I believed it. It made sense. I could see what they were saying made sense to me and fit what the Bible said. And their literature today, even if you go and download the literature today, it has a lot of those things that you can go and, yep, that's what the Bible says. Yep, that makes sense. The problem is that David C. Pack has veered so far away from his own literature and from what Herbert W. Armstrong taught as far as prophecy and understanding of who even God is in the Bible, where the Father and Jesus Christ are in the Old and New Testament is completely off the rails. And so his own literature doesn't match what he currently teaches. And he recently acknowledged if things went another year, he'd have to rewrite the literature. But he said that like 3 or 4 years ago. If we're still here, we got to rewrite the literature. So the literature is a different animal from the prophecy series that he's currently going on with setting dates about the return of Jesus Christ. But more importantly to the question, he is not the single author of these books. He has a team of people, or had a team of people that were helping him with it. His name is just on the cover. So if you want to say that Herbert W. Armstrong was invalid as far as an authority figure or his interpretation of the Bible, then that would also extend to RCG. I personally believed that their material, for the most part, was dead on. In fact, I've used Dave Pack's own words out of his own books to expose what he is doing today. It's like, it's not my opinion or my idea. It's Dave Pack's opinion. It's Dave Pack's opinion and idea that is exposing him today.
Okay, question 3 we'll skip because it was if there was not material. Okay, question 4. What is the reputation of the leader or group?
That's a twofold question. There's the reputation inside, and then there's the reputation outside, and those are two very different animals. I would say the reputation inside, I mean, I haven't been there since March of 2021, so maybe the vast majority of opinions have changed inside Restored Church of God. And if those opinions has changed, they're not telling anybody because they can't. If you speak your real mind in RCG, you'll get kicked out. But you know, Dave Pack has declared that he is an apostle. And then sometimes, depending upon the time of the month for him, he's Elijah or not Elijah. It's like however he feels that's when he's Elijah or not Elijah. But as far as like the opinion of the leader, oh, Mr. Pack is clever. Oh, he's just really funny. He's so deep into scripture. He understands prophecy like nobody else. God is using him in a powerful way. I mean, I'm saying that in a tone of like people who are still fans, but then there has to be, and I've talked to people recently that are still there. It's like, something's wrong. This is off. It doesn't make any sense. So the reputation is a mixed bag inside, but outside, I think his reputation is being exposed for what it really is, as far as being he's a false teacher and a false prophet, and he is not a man of his word. I'm actually going to write an article, Is David C. Pack a Man of His Word? And when I say that, I don't believe he's an intentional liar, but the things he has said publicly have proven to be false through the passage of time. That is not a judgment call on my part about his heart and whether he's a good person or not. But when you set a date for the return of Jesus Christ and it doesn't happen, history proves you to be false in that way. And the problem is that the falsehoods are stacking up. And the reason I started the website is to document and show the public what he is saying and when he said it. And just that alone, in the man's own words, he condemns himself. So his reputation is not good.
Speaking to that in Worldwide, and I look back on Worldwide, to me seems more like the classic definition of a cult. The opinion of Herbert Armstrong within house was very, I don't say godlike, but when he would come into the room, everybody would stand and applaud. When he would give a sermon, everybody would applaud. When Garner Ted flew into a feast site with the corporate jet, he would buzz the auditorium. Everybody inside the auditorium would applaud. Here comes Jesus. Ted. It was much more severe. I don't know if anybody applauds for Dave when he gets in the room. I can't imagine it. But I look back, the Worldwide Church of God was more cultish in the sense of its leadership, the adoration of the leadership. And they were very charismatic. They were good speakers, but I guess I would disagree with Mark on this, that I don't think Herbert Armstrong was any more correct than Dave Pack on his understanding ultimately, but that's a whole other topic. But the opinion of the leadership in the church was almost godlike, very special people, very worthy of this, that, and the other thing. They drove Herbert Armstrong, got driven around all over the place in a black limousine that was parked under the administration building. It had a secret entrance, and I think Ted sang the song, something in the back of a black limousine. I think they said he was mocking his father back in the day. But anyway, it was much more severe in Worldwide towards Herbert Armstrong and his son Ted than to Dave Pack.
Yeah, the question is talking about, Don, reputation versus adoration, which
Okay,
that's,
well, the reputation inside the church was anything Herbert said was biblically true. God gave it to him. Anything Ted said about the world, the second coming, the timing, that was true. So that was their reputation. They just spoke the truth, and nobody questioned it. Nobody got to ask questions about it. And if you ask the wrong question, you might find yourself on the outside. The reputation of the church outside during my time, I don't think it was, I don't know what it was. I think one Lutheran minister told me in the 70s, he was my neighbor, and we got talking about the church, and he knew about the church. And he said, well, he said, I will tell you, the problem with the Worldwide Church of God is that they haven't learned not to read the Bible like a newspaper. And that always stuck with me. They read the Bible like a newspaper. You read the news, you say, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. What's going to happen? He said, that's what's the problem with your church, is that you read the Bible like a newspaper. And he said, that's going to come back and bite you. And I was like 25 years old when he said that. I never forgot it, and I believed it. I said, you're right. So that was the only outside reputation. Then, of course, as the years went on, the state of California moved in. The reputation really went down the toilet.
Okay, question 5 is kind of a mouthful, but I'll try to simplify it after I say it. What are the stated purposes or goals of the group? Do they seem realistic? Are promises being made? What is tangible, testable? So I want to simplify this as in the end of times, I guess, or the date making, I guess you could say, is how I want to interpret this, because overall, Mark?
The stated purpose of Restored Church of God is to prepare people for the coming of Jesus Christ, the coming of the kingdom of God to the earth. That is a biblical, that is the gospel message that Jesus Christ came to tell everyone, that the good news of the kingdom of God. So that is the stated goal. It is not tangible or testable, because that's like being tangible or testing, anything that's written in the Bible, other than building character and treating people nicely and loving your neighbor, obeying God's teachings bears fruit, and that is a physical, tangible thing. But the goal of the group is simply on its face to prepare for the way for Jesus Christ to return. That's the same goal as the Worldwide Church of God under Herbert W. Armstrong. The personal goals is different of the leadership than the primary goal for the church when Jesus Christ said, I will build my church, that teach everyone in all nations, the gospel. And that's the commission, to go out, feed the sheep, and preach the gospel. And that's what they do. Does it seem realistic? Yes, because that's what churches have been doing for 2,000 years. All of Christianity's been doing that. They've had their various ways and forms of doing it, disagreements about when the Sabbath is, those kind of things. But that's the primary goal. And every Christian church and denomination, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, in some way, all come back to the root goal of what Jesus Christ had taught. So I will stick to that versus trying to get into the nuances of what RCG specifically is doing.
What about in the, as they say, he's saying that they're the one true church, that they're the only church. That is kind of like a promise that he's saying to them, like, listen, I'm telling you, this is the only true church.
Yeah, and that's also, but that I'll let Dennis pick up on that, because that is just a continuation of what Herbert Armstrong taught.
Dennis?
Well, that's not true. There is no one true church. I think we've proven that through history, but how many people do you know in the hundreds and hundreds of denominations of Christianity who would tell you, look, I know I go to the wrong church. I know this isn't the true church, but I like it. It's a nice church. I'm going to stay here. There can't possibly be one true church that any one person can figure out they happen to be the leader of. That's just ridiculous. But what that does is it confines those members to that church, and instills an incredible amount of fear to them for leaving that church, if they ever do leave that church. So hold on, that's somebody texting me. So, I don't believe in the concept of the one true church anymore, simply because every church I've ever been associated with, and any Christian will tell you that they go to it. Maybe they talk about the one true truth, but as Mark pointed out, they disagree on what the truth of the Bible is, days, time, seasons, years. So, that's why there's so many denominations. If it was a one true church, there'd be one true way to understand it, and there isn't. There's so many ways to understand it. So,
And
yeah.
one thing to point out in the Bible, one true church is not a term that's New Testament. That is a made up phrase, one true church.
Yeah, and one of the things I've done it maybe a little sarcastically, but I've always encouraged since, for 25 years, the ministry, former ministry or whatever, worldwide, and certainly of any of the splinters, to get themselves a copy of the New Testament and read it. Because so many of, virtually all the churches of God spend more time in the Old Testament than they do in the New. And Herbert Armstrong always said, when you go to those churches, you hear, what was it, about Jesus. You hear all about Jesus, but we're going to tell you what Jesus said. And it was the kingdom of God and all of that. And the Worldwide Church of God didn't have a lot of use for Pauline theology, born again Christianity of the New Testament. Herbert Armstrong spent way too much time in the Old Testament. Dave Pack wallows in the Old Testament. And, I've offered to go to Wadsworth and debate Dave right in front of his church. And of course, he's not going to do that. But that would be fun for me. It would be fun, especially if I stuck to the New Testament. He wouldn't understand it.
Maybe if you come to put a bid on the new house, Dennis, that's for sale, that you could use that as used to be in town.
On a massage therapist's income, I'll probably have to pass.
Okay, question 6. What accomplishments are presented? Is there a track record that can be checked? Have there been results? Are they measurable? Are there proofs to be claimed?
I'm sorry.
This is the one that I was trying to keep straight face on.
I can't sway my head enough. Yeah.
Mark?
No. There are no accomplishments. If there are accomplishments, I would be on my knees praying to God that I could get back in. And because everything is presented as dates that fail. And so the Bible even says, flee from such people. And even Dave Pack in his 90 Reasons to Follow the Truth instructed people to flee from what Dave is now teaching. So no, there are no accomplishments. Yeah, they built a campus and they had a TV show and built a studio that they don't use. And they have publications that are out of date, that they don't write anything new. Their social media presence is recycled from 5 to 10 years ago. I've been in endless meetings where they were going to do this and do that and nothing ever happened. So the only accomplishments the church has is cranking out Dave Pack sermons. And I call it the Dave Pack sermon machine, because that's all RCG does is continually, he gives sermons and continually stops people from working in the afternoons to listen to him however many times a week he wants to do that. So their accomplishments are nothing except keeping themselves busy and failing. And that's
I like the
simple as it could be.
I like the Peanuts cartoon that I think Snoopy or whatever, or Linus said, productive. I thought we were just supposed to look busy. That's the way the churches are. The worldwide, nothing's come from the Worldwide Church of God. In fact, I was just reading the Living Church of God, which is another offshoot. They just had their evangelistic campaign or whatever to bring people into the church in like 5 cities. And of the 5 cities, they had 44 people respond. And that just means those people came to the meetings. 5, it's 8 people a meeting. And of those, virtually nobody joins. And that probably cost who knows how many $100,000 to have that campaign, I remember the church had America Listen campaign with Garner Ted. You know, that was a pretty big production. But yeah, look back, it's all gone. It's all unproductive.
You know, when I was in United Church of God, we used to have in my congregation in Oakland, they would have a church organized like open night, like Thursday night Bible study, where they would invite the public to come out. And in Oakland, we would be excited if like 5 or 6 people showed up in our congregation to come and listen. And usually more than half of them left at the break in between. And no people ever joined. And this was, you know, in United. And I think it speaks to what's wrong with the splinters and the offshoots of the Worldwide Church of God, that the audience is very small. You have to be self-motivated. I don't think you can be marketed or sold that this is the right place. At least it wasn't for me. I fully believe that God was calling me. He opened my eyes to the Sabbath and the 10 Commandments, and I needed to start obeying and find a church that did those things. And unless you have people that walk in the door that are already motivated, you're not going to convince anybody after they're there. And I think that that's the problem with a lot of these offshoots, is they're trying to market and get bodies in the door and hoping that the numbers game pans out.
And I think they're doomed. They're doomed. 50 years from now, there won't be anything left of anything. All the people will have died, you know? So yeah, nothing. I look back on it. I mean, I have to watch my attitude about Dennis. How would you be so stupid? How could you have been so stupid? You know, you would have been a good paleontologist, a good geologist, a good cosmologist, you know. How could you have been so stupid? You know, but then I know back then you could not have talked me out of it. I guarantee you could not have talked me out of it. If you'd have said, Dennis, this is a cult, get out of it, I would have said, get behind me, Satan. I'm supposed to be here.
Me too.
You know, and the only way you get out is when you wake up, and nobody wakes you up but you. And I would tell that to the Restored Church of God members that might hear this. We're not going to wake you up. You got to wake up and take your stand. And yeah, so anyway, it's an
Based on
emotional
what you
topic
said,
with me, because in the middle of the night, sometimes I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, think, what on earth have I done with my life? You know, I gave the best years to the worst possible thing I could have ever come up with. It did save me from Vietnam. I was 18 years old and my draft number was 14 in 1968. And I wrote a paper on, I'm going to be a pastor and I'm not going to kill anybody. And my draft board said, okay, you're out. And that was rare. But if I'd had to go to Vietnam, I'd either be dead right now or I'd be a mental case. So I don't think like a soldier.
so it was a good thing that you came into the Worldwide Church of God, because
It saved me. It did, because I pastored plenty of veterans from Vietnam and they were a mess. They were a mess. They survived the war, but I'm not sure they survived life. So yeah, that's one thing I'm grateful for. And you know, I made some friends, but I can still now count my residual friends from my church experience on one hand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, question 7. What about former members, devotees, clients? How are the people who left the group treated? What is said about them? Will the group give your names of people to who left, both of those who were satisfied and those who were not? Mark.
Well, being a former member, it depends on what is said about you and how you're treated. It all depends on how you leave. Do you leave quietly? Do you leave loudly? And how much noise do you make after the fact? And those have tremendous factors in whether or not A, you can come back ever, or B, how you're spoken about or treated. I'm probably the worst Antichrist that's ever left the Restored Church of God, according to the leadership over there, because I have chosen to be the most consistently public about my criticisms, critiques, and just exposing people for what they're saying inside the Restored Church of God, setting dates, or, you know, indoctrinating people to policies that are completely unbiblical or just flat out biblical fraud. But most people, when people would leave, oh, it's really sad, so-and-so left, maybe they'll repent and come back someday. And there was a lot of compassion, and, you know, you hope that those people will turn around someday. If you say anything what is perceived as an attack on the church, you are now an enemy of Christ and you are considered antichrist. And I remember hearing that and weighing that when I knew I was going to leave, and hearing from the lectern, people who leave are antichrist. And I don't dismiss that. I don't laugh that off. And I didn't. I weighed that option. And people who are still there currently weigh that option. Are they deceived by the devil? Are they going to go into the lake of fire? Are they losing a chance in salvation? Have they committed the unpardonable sin, which is losing the Holy Spirit, which means you're dead forever? You burn and you're never coming back. You have to weigh all those things. So former members have to weigh the options of whether they can prove what they're hearing and seeing goes contrary to God's word, or whether they're simply deceived and want to go out and sin again. So it varies from person to person, but most people, the greatest like joy for the brethren, and also especially for the ministry, is when somebody leaves and comes back. And I watched that happen over the years, where somebody would be put out or they're suspended, but then they come back and, oh, it's all hugs and kisses. Oh, it's so great to see you again. But most of those people don't leave they don't stay in very long. They actually leave again, because they're probably like, yeah, I made a mistake. I should have stayed out, and I'm gone. And that's what happens. So for the most part,
Sometimes,
go ahead, Dennis.
well, sometimes you have to make a couple runs at something before you catch on that you should have done this or that. So yeah, I've seen that too. My experience is, unless you cause trouble for the church, you're mostly forgotten. They don't care. They forget about you and they move on. My parents, my dad was a local elder in Worldwide under Dave. My mom was a deaconess. I had 35 members of my extended family in the Church of God. But when Dave or the local pastor would disfellowship somebody for whatever reason, they were usually very close friends of my parents. And so my parents would always call them and take them out to lunch and stay in touch with them and get together with them. And that was a no-no. That was a big no-no. But because my dad was my dad, and there were three other full-time pastors in our family, Dave or the local minister, from what I saw, he wouldn't touch my father because there would be hell to pay, But my parents were very compassionate people, and when their best friends were put out of the church, they would just stay in touch with them and encourage them and stay friends with them and invite them over. And boy, I'd said to Dad, you must have an independent force shield around you protecting you, because that's not how it works. And but that was just the nature of my parents. But mostly you're forgotten. When I got called, I'd done a Bible study, got home one night, I got a phone call at 9 o'clock at night. It was church administration. Short call, they said, well, we're going to go ahead and terminate you, blah, 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 blah. I said, what? I said, 26 years? And the guy said, well, just call the personnel office. They'll give you the details. And I kept waiting for something else, like a thank you or a it'll be okay, or and that was it. And he hung up. And I have never again, ever again in 25 years heard from another administrator or person or minister in the Church of God. Once I was out, the next day I was forgotten, and and that's okay. That's okay. I forgot them too. Well, I didn't forget them. Actually, I didn't.
You're still talking about them 25 years later.
Know, yeah, that was a mistake. I have not forgotten about them.
But that brings up a good point that I need to make clear, is that inside the Restored Church of God, if you are put out or you leave, members are not supposed to talk to you. It's not as bad as Mennonite shunning, where they turn their face from you, ignore you. If you say hello, they'll walk past you, like the Mennonites will do when you leave the Mennonite church. But Restored Church of God people are told, you do not have friendships with these people. You can say hi, you can, if you bump into them at the grocery store, fine. You don't socialize with them, you don't go out to dinner with them, you don't talk on the phone with them. They are now non-people to you because they're in the devil's world. And if you talk to them, the devil will pull you out of the church. And I think that was a loose, not strictly enforced policy inside the Restored Church of God for many years. But within the past year and a half, it has been hammered from the lectern. That is wrong. That is going against God. I don't know if they said the words, it's a sin. I don't have that sermon. But from what I have heard recently from people who have left, and actually someone who is still in the Restored Church of God, that's pretty pushed upon. And it used to be where people that I know had friends that were still inside the Restored Church of God, and then suddenly no phone calls answered, no texts responded, they're not in the chat anymore. There has been a stronger push to separate friendships from within the Restored Church of God to those who are outside the Restored Church of God. So they started to have a more hardline policy regarding that. So I guess to the question, if you leave now, you are giving up friends and family inside the church. You should expect that you will not have contact with any of them. Even when I was in Restored Church of God, I had friends who left and I was obeying that. I unfriended them on Facebook.
How dare you?
I was trying to be obedient to God's way and obeying like all the people that are doing there now. The people who are doing that inside Restored don't want to do that. It hurts them when people leave. They're not bad people. They're not mean. They're not like, oh, you're a sinner and I'm a saint. It's like they don't have that attitude. It's just like, well, I'll get in trouble, or they have their conscience pricked, or they feel guilty. Like, oh, if I keep friends with my, stay friends with my friend who's outside Restored, I'm lying to my minister. I'm lying to the brethren. I can't lie anymore. And I would never want somebody to be in contact with me if they were pricking their conscience or believing they're lying, because, that which is not of faith is accounted as sin. And you don't want you don't want to be a stumbling block for somebody else. So people have started obeying that more and more. I even had loose contact with people, like when I left, they still wrote me and said, oh, I understand. And, I still like you as a person. And, I hope things work out, blah, blah, blah. And those people are now all gone and don't respond anymore. And I don't push it. And I know people who have also lost friends. So leaving the church, it's not just, oh, I don't, worship on the Sabbath anymore. I'm collecting with those people. It's the friendships that you've built up over 5, 10, 20 years are gone. And that is the punishment for leaving, quote, God's way and that church. And RCG enforces that more now than ever.
Okay, question 8. Are former members willing to speak about their experiences? How do they evaluate their time with the group or person?
I'll let Dennis take this one first.
Well, look at me. That's how I evaluate my time with the group or person. I try to explain to people, don't join the group and don't follow the person. Yeah, I mean, say the question again. I'm sorry, I got myself off
Are
track.
former members willing to speak, and how do they evaluate their time with, say, the church?
I say most people I know would say it was a waste of time. They were sincere and they were naive. That was the combination. Very sincere, very naive, but wish they hadn't done it. Wish somebody had talked them out of it. Others, I mean, it's very individualistic. Some probably miss it terribly, because it was a very social group. Yeah, that's about the message I can say. It does vary with the person. I think most people regret that they ever were in touch with it, but like I've said, I regret that, but you couldn't have talked me out of it. So if you have got to go through the process, and that's how you learn in life. We used to say experience is the best teacher, but the tuition is high. Well, as I've gotten older, I've changed that to experience is the only teacher. Everything else is hearsay. So I feel like this is how I had to learn myself, that was a mistake, and people make those kind of mistakes all the time. They start out, they get in the wrong profession. They go to college and take the wrong topics and become the wrong kind of thing. And in midlife, they decide, boy, I hate this. I want to do something else. So that's not
Marriages
uncommon.
are like that.
What's that?
Some
Yeah.
marriages are like that.
Well, I've talked to myself about how many times I've promised, or I told young couples, that you must never, ever change when I did their marriage. This and this and this was the way you must be. I kind of forgot to tell them that the moment they walk out the door, everything around them is going to change. And I've had people say, "You're not the same person I married," and I've always responded by saying, "Well, thank God for that. People change. Nothing's the same. I don't have the same enthusiasm I had for religion, and I was, I have found the most adamant people against, let's say, either agnosticism or atheism are the people who soaked in it the deepest. In one sense, it's been said the Bible is the greatest evidence against itself for somebody like me who studies it for decades and realizes what I've realized. I don't speak for Mark. I know Mark and I are different on our approach to what the Bible is and whether it's even important. I've gotten to the point where people say, well, the Bible says, and to me, it's like, well, so what? Well, the Quran says, and the Book of Mormon says. And so that's where I've come, but then that's taken 30 years to do. I'll still kid you, Mark, that where you are, so was I. Where I am, so you shall be.
I hope not. No offense.
You don't offend me.
I can't imagine ever being an atheist, experiencing what I had and believing.
I get it. I get it. I get it.
And I also disagree that, and maybe this is a time capsule, that I don't believe I wasted my time. I don't believe it was a mistake. I don't believe I was, how foolish of me and how crazy it was for me to be involved in the Restored Church of God. I don't regret any of it, actually. It was a journey that I needed to go on, and I was fully behind believing that God was showing me this is the place to be and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And when I gave all my money to David C. Pack and the Restored Church of God and emptied out my retirement accounts, I'm not bitter and pissy about it today because I gave it to God and I didn't give it to him. So if David,
I did all that. I did all that. I've given $100,000 to the Worldwide Church of God in tithes out of my ministerial pay. I estimated that I probably inspired the giving of over $70 million over 26 years and 14 congregations by people who faithfully tithed. And of course, that's when I say it came to, that's what I regret. That came to nothing. So yeah, I mean, I get it, Mark. I get it.
But and you were a minister, so you have more to regret.
We're 3 decades apart. We're 3 decades apart. What's that?
You were a minister, so you have more to regret because you were actually shepherding other people and counseling them and advising them to things that you don't believe today. So there has to be the weight of, oh no, I told this family to do this or that, correct?
Well, there is and there isn't, because I taught the Bible, where my regrets are not. I have no regrets, and I've talked about this. I have no regrets over teaching the church's belief on healing, because I didn't believe it. They believed get anointed, don't go to a doctor back in the day. I never believed that, and I took people to doctors. I never believed in the place of safety. I thought that was dangerous, a type of thing. I never separated a couple, because even in the New Testament, you can make that argument that they're not married to the real person. They have to go back to, it's crazy. I never did that. So my regrets are things that common sense told me. Don't teach that. Don't make people do that. I brought people back into the church who were disfellowshipped, who had no intention of coming back because they thought they wouldn't be welcome, until I went to their house and said, hey, would you like to come back to church? Let's talk. So my regrets are not the foolish things that I thought the church taught that were going to come back and be painful for me. I don't have anybody in my mind that I said, oh my gosh, I told them not to go to the hospital and they died. I told them not to have chemo and they're dead. Their children, I said, well, we'll just pray about it, and your child's appendicitis, that's in God's hands, and the kid died. I know ministers that have that. I don't have that because I never bought into it. And for that, I'm grateful.
Well, I think,
and nobody punished me. Nobody said, well, if you're not going to teach that, you can't be a minister. I had my kids immunized in 1974, when that was just not the thing to do. And even my wife at the time, she grew up in the church, and she was like, you shouldn't do that. I said, look, I grew up with this. I take responsibility. I'm not going to hassle with the school district over something that's not going to hurt them. It's probably going to protect them. And I trust the science more than the church does. And I took responsibility, and I don't regret that. I'll never regret that. And I don't remember really taking a lot of flack for it, because I think any number of members, and they did know that I did that, probably said, "Yeah, that's what I'm going to do," because I gave them permission to do it because I did it. And so anyway, I want to get off track.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. So, but the first part of the question, Don, about former members willing to speak about their experiences, the answer is no. I mean, Dennis and I are kind of the unique diamonds in the sea of glass, kind of, because, and I'm not saying I'm a diamond, it's that most people don't want to talk about it. Some people leave and don't even want to talk to family and friends about it because they're so embarrassed, ashamed, or just hurt that they don't want to talk about it. How many people experience a life trauma and can't wait to get out and talk about it until they decide they want to help others who go through the same trauma? And that's kind of like, I think, what Dennis has done for many years and what I am doing now. So most people don't want to talk about it, and that's their own prerogative, and I don't push, but there's a lot of fear inside the Restored Church of God. And I'm kind of a living example that if you speak out, you're going to get in trouble.
And I would just add real quickly, the people that don't talk about it are hurting themselves, because talking about it is part of the healing.
Yes.
It's part of the healing. Recognizing the experience for what it was and how it made you feel, or the price that you paid for having the experience, is part of the healing.
Right.
Everything I've ever written, and even to this day, is for me. I mean, I'd like to help people come out of, that kind of thinking. But I also believe that, as I've said, they're going to have to do it themselves. This may help them, but I guarantee you, I think, Mark, you realize there are people watching this who agree with you, and they're going to stay flat in their seats until the day they die, even though they understand this is true, because they're overwhelmed by the other kinds of fears. So mostly I've done all this for these many years to process my own experience and to live with it. And of course, it does help. I get the same kind of emails. Thank you for this and that. Don't go away. And we appreciate that. And you've given me a courage I never had before. But that's still a personal decision that people have to come to.
Right. And most people, like people who have processed, just like, I'm putting that part of my life behind me, like Kevin Denis, who was an evangelist with the Restored Church of God, who's Dave 𝘿𝑝AC's son-in-law, married to his daughter, Jennifer. He went on the Worldwide Unchosen Church podcast, and that was part of his healing journey, to get out publicly and speak about his experiences and how they are doing, and they're doing wonderfully, and they're very happy. But he's not interested in continuing the talk circuit, because I asked him recently, Don, if he would be willing to talk to you, and he's not interested in that, and I don't blame him for it. And I think what he has done with Dr. Tricia Jenkins will have legs for a very, very long time, that people will discover the podcast, hear him, remember him, they'll leave the church and then listen to it and then go, oh, wow. So I think that those kind of things, like what we do here with these interviews, the RCG series, and also now this cults series, it's not something for people to get next week and respond to it. It's something that sits on the internet, and eventually someday they may find comfort or help. And the reason I say comfort is because I've actually had people contact me and tell me what I have said is what they have been thinking. And it gave them relief to know that they weren't alone, or they weren't imagining it, or they weren't making it up. That, there is logic and reason behind their concerns, their fears. And so we're giving people a voice, and maybe it's Dennis's and our role to be the voice for others who are unable to speak or don't want to, because there has been silence for a very long time. And I think Dr. Jenkins doing her worldwide podcast, here it is, 2022, and the WCG basically started falling apart in 1995, and people are still talking about it and sharing their experiences, and there's interest in that. And that says a lot about people of Dennis's generation and our generation that are having these experiences today. What happened, the pattern in Worldwide is carrying on with Restored and Living and United and 𝑘𝐝 and all the others. And the more people that want the information or have concerns and doubts about what they're experiencing, to hear a voice that's saying, this is my experience, and they connect with it, that's kind of a big deal.
Okay, we have question 9 and 10 left. What we're going to do is we're going to split this episode 2 into part 1 and part 2. That way it's not 2 hours long. And then we'll come back with the next one for you. We'll record it after this. Okay, so question 9. What is the process? Ooh, don't laugh. What is the process for filing complaints? Is there a feedback mechanism that is real and honored? Are complaints made public? Is there a money back guarantee?
See, you're having a hard time asking that with a straight face because you already know all the answers.
I'm trying to be biased, but yes, I know.
Well, let me just jump in. No.
Yes. Add color, Dennis. Add color.
That is color.
Make it crystal clear.
That's profound color. The answer to the question is no. Never has been, never will be.
The process for filing complaints is don't speak about it in Restored Church of God. Don't speak about it to other brethren. You go to the ministers with your concerns. If you come into them, and this was my experience and the experience of others, if you go into their office with a humble, childlike, I'm just trying to understand attitude, you can walk out the door still a member or an employee. And I was actually shocked by and I'm going to be serious, I was shocked by the compassion and understanding of ministers over the years when I counseled with them. Former minister 𝘿𝙚𝙣𝙣𝙣𝙣, I remember being very understanding and kind and thoughtful and gentle in his approach to tell me I was wrong. I was reprimanded by Jeff Ambrose and Brad Schleifer in the nicest possible way. I'm sitting there crying in the office because I so felt terrible about what I had said and done because how it was received, not because my question was wrong. And then even when I tried to leave, Brad Schleifer sat with me for over 2 hours, turned off his phone, the computer, and he gave me his full attention when I was trying to resign. So filing your complaint, if it's done with the right attitude, you will get a positive response. And so those inside the Restored Church of God, if you go to your minister with I don't understand this, please help me, I'm trying to stay here, versus an accusatory tone, you can get through it. The problem is that when you ask about the prophecy series specifically, your field minister is not going to be able to answer the question because they don't understand it either.
Or common.
Well,
no, that's a hard line.
If I could just say, in some ways, the reason what Mark's describing there is a submission. The reason these guys can be so nice is that you've already showed, not you, but well, you too, did. You showed your submission, that they were talking down to you. They were, you were being submissive, that you weren't talking eye to eye, face to face, man to man, person to person. That's what isn't going to work. And so by crying, it's like Dave Pack, when he wrote to the ministry about how to be a minister in the Restored Church of God, that incredibly stupid letter that he wrote, the test that he gave, he said to the men that wanted to come and be in the ministry of a Restored Church of God had to pass this test. He said, do you consider yourself as having been, and rate yourself from 1 to 5, do you consider yourself being weak, cowardly, slothful, covetous, confused, compromising, foolish, political, heretical, deceitful, easily deceived, and betrayed your calling?
Yeah,
that's what Dave, and if you say yes to that, then you've submitted. You've given up your brains. You've lost your manhood. Not you. People have lost their manhood.
Yeah, me.
And that's part of that. The demeaning of the person and the submission of the person is a classic trait of a cult leader, to push that person down. And then you can come talk to us. Then, if you can ask your question in that kind of an environment with this admission of your absolute worthlessness, Dave goes on to say, do you believe ministers should be able to voice opinions to others about where headquarters is wrong, what Mr. Armstrong said or taught was wrong, or Mr. Pack teaches, does, or says things that are wrong, your boss at the church, where you disagree doctrinally? Do you think you have the right to speak up about that? That's the question he asked the ministry. And the answer Dave wanted was, no, sir, no, I don't believe that. I believe that I need to just submit that I won't question you at all. Then we'll talk. And that is not a talk. That is a slave master situation. And I don't talk that way. I mean, sooner or later I was going to get in trouble. I'm Dutch. I can't help it.
Well, when they say refund, I would say it's not so much like you get a refund for, your tithes. I would say maybe in a way of, you're on hard times and you need help from the church, but we've already learned that, listen, you need to find every other way possible before we can help you. So, it's kind of like when you put something in, you think, this is, I'm doing good. I'm helping other people. I'm helping the church. God forbid if something happens to me, my church got my back, but really they don't do that.
No, church doesn't have your back. You leave the church, you don't get help. That's it. You don't qualify for help. And if you were in the church, the loops and hoops you have to jump through to get help, as Dawn, you're saying, check this out and check that out. I mean, good grief. I signed away my Social Security when I was 22 years old because the church can ask me to do that because they'll pay the retirement. And so then I ended up with neither retirement nor Social Security from the church. So no, they don't have your back, but they got a lot of excuses, but there is no refund. And yeah, I mean, I just had lunch with 𝘿𝙚𝙣𝙣𝙣 Jr. and he tried to explain to me why, he felt bad that I didn't get a retirement. And I don't buy the answer. I don't buy the answer. But that's the way it is, So the average person leaves the church, they're not going to get any help if they fall on hard times. The average minister, if he leaves the church in restored or whatever, and you fall on hard times, forget it. That's your fault. You shouldn't have left the church. I mean, what's his name? Mark 𝑔𝑟𝑜𝑤𝑎n?
Alex 𝑔𝑟OWAN?
Yeah, Alex 𝑔𝑟OWAN. He tells his story. I mean, he was living in a hotel.
Yeah.
A motel room with his family just to get his act together. I mean, he's been through a lot, but he was convicted to do it.
Right.
But no, of course, there's no help. There's no help. The only help you get is if you're with the group. And I'll guarantee you the only help you'll ever get is if they can check your tithe record and find out you've already given third tithe. So you're kind of getting a little bit of your own money back, But if you haven't, you're not going to get help either.
I'm going to paint a little bit of a rosier picture than Dennis is projecting as far as help is concerned. There's financial help, and then there's just helping people. And I know for a fact that there are senior citizens in the headquarters congregation here in Wadsworth, Ohio, that have gotten a lot of assistance from the headquarters ministry.
I don't disagree with that, Mark. They did that in Worldwide too.
Helping people move, helping them find a place. I remember helping with a group of fellas. We were moving a gentleman in from one retirement home to another retirement home. So those types of helps, just so the audience is aware, if you're a member and in the church and let's say a senior citizen, you will get help because they also know you're of past retirement age or not. Well, nobody retires and restored. You're past the ability to work and create an income. And those people are not looked down on. They're, the gray hair that you rise before as the Bible instructs and God's wants. So those people are taken care of. And I know of senior citizens there that's why they're still there probably, because what are they going to do? Leave their only support structure?
Let me just explain. When I was a student, a senior year before going in the ministry, I was in the third tithe department. I did the budgets for widows in the church, gave out hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. I saw where that went. The problem was that the church collected far more third tithe than they ever gave out. And the temptation was to use it for other things, which they did.
That's unbiblical.
Well, but they collect more. If most of the baptized members are giving third tithe, and 2-3% of the membership needs help, there's a lot of money there that's not going to anybody because it's not needed to go to anybody. Just to know in one particular example, in Worldwide, one of the evangelists wanted to invest in $10,000 worth of gold coins, and he took it from third tithe. He asked for it. Give me some third tithe. I want to buy these gold coins. as an investment, and they gave it to him. So far more third tithe is taken in than is used. And the
Yes.
temptation to use it for other things. In other words, you're never going to get a letter from Mr. Pack saying, look, we have way too much third tithe. Let's go ahead and cut that back.
No,
It's not going to happen.
it's a surplus in RCG as well, the third tithe. But that's different than, I guess, assistance, because then we're getting into the weeds about what kind of assistance. But yeah, third tithe is if it's not spent by the end of the fiscal year, it can go into the general fund. And I've heard that from several sources. So third tithe
I
is
wrote
the
checks.
surplus.
I wrote checks for members for their rent and their electric and their food to the tune of tens or $100,000 from the church. I know. But if you leave the church, forget it. Or if you're a minister, forget it.
Okay, question 10.
When I got, go ahead. Sorry.
Question 10, just to move on. Are your questions answered directly? Are you told time and time again to listen to your heart and not your head? Are you told that you are too new, too uninformed, too nosy, and so on, and shouldn't be asking such questions? Are you expected to take what's said on faith and criticize if you challenge that approach and ask for more?
Yes.
Mark's like,
I'm thinking.
I don't have to think about that. Yes.
If, again, it comes back to how you approach it, and then all those things can apply. And, catching more flies with sugar than vinegar, which Dennis must love to drink vinegar by the gallon, the way he presents how he should talk to the ministers. But I went in low and slow and tried to, I could get more answers, but the problem was when I knew that something was not biblical, and I would ask the question in a way that wasn't stating I knew it was unbiblical, saying, I don't understand how this can be. They will dance around and talk around and do the hokey pokey, but in the end, you'll walk out of the meeting knowing they didn't actually answer your question. They just talked around it because they themselves know there's no direct answer. Now, sometimes it's just a straightforward biblical question and that you can get an answer. But when it comes to especially prophecy that's open to interpretation, depending what week it is, then you will not get a direct answer. You'll get a lot of talk around. Oh, you need to have faith. If you've proven this is God's church, which is normally the answer. If you've proven this is God's church, you have to trust the process. You have to trust his government, which means stop thinking, stop proving, just accept this is God's way that he wants to do it. And so it's not that you're too young or too uninformed or too nosy. It's that you have to trust God's ministry and God's government that circumvents all logic and reason and Bible verses that counter to what you're reading. And that's kind of the playbook that they have. Well, they'll attack the motivation behind the question, not the question itself, and not address the question. So sometimes I've gotten an answer, but other times I just didn't get an answer. Or I knew right when I walked out the door, I didn't get the answer. So I'm kind of on my own. And yes, you are supposed to take on faith what is said, and you do not challenge or criticize. If you do, I mean, you can get into it and say, look, have a heart to heart, look, I kind of don't believe that. And then the minister will still work with you depending on what your attitude is about it. So in a lot of ways, yes. In a lot of ways, no. And it depends on your approach, and it depends on what the question actually is.
Well, and two, Mark, what I learned is don't ask.
I learned that eventually too, yeah.
Because you'll learn, don't ask. And then I also practiced, I'll tell you one of my secrets of getting through the ministry at times. Ask and you shall not have. Do not ask and all things are possible. That worked for me. But if I had a question, I learned real quick, especially towards the end, when I asked a question on behalf of myself or the congregation to Pasadena, call them up on the phone. Hey, I heard this, I heard that. Oh no, we're not going to do that. No, that's not true. A month later, they did it. My experience was 100% of the answers, 100% of the questions I asked, 100% of the time, the answer was the opposite of the answer I was given. On those topics. But I think too, the idea of going humbly, submitting again is just another way of, once you get into that attitude, then they'll listen to you, but they still don't have the answer,
No.
especially if the answer goes against the leader's answer, which they pretty well know.
Yeah.
And again, that's very cultish, it is.
They'll toe the company line no matter what verses you throw at them or what Dave Pack quotes you already have that he said.
Well, they have other verses they'll throw back at you,
Yeah.
And again, what you said, just trust. There's even a Protestant hymn that says, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy. Well, that's true in these winters. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to survive. Just have faith. And you do that enough and it becomes very unacceptable. That's not the way to answer questions. It's better to say, I don't have an answer for that, or I understand the question, but I don't know what to tell you. It's better to do that in the long run than what you're explaining is done to people. It's a put off. Don't ask, don't tell. That's my experience.
Okay, well, we have done questions 1 through 10. We have questions 11 through 20. We will come back and do that for you. So it'll be a 2-part little series there.
Part two.
Part 2 of part 2, 2.2 and 2.1. So,
Dave Pack is rubbing off on you.
yeah. So thank you for watching this. If you would like to see the other questions that we're going to go through on this, please stay tuned. It'll be released back to back with this. Until next time, thank you for watching.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.